Welcome back and hello if you're new. One of metalcore's true pioneers, Unearth have been a force to be reckoned with. Following the release that was a metalcore blueprint of the oncoming storm, Unearth have slowly but surely gone from strength to strength, and now the band return on their 7th album, Extinction. Topping Darkness in the Light was always going to be a pretty tough task, but for me, Watchers didn't really quite inject anything new, and did see me sort of fall off the wayside a little bit when it came to Unearth. Going into this album as open-minded as possible, I really wanted the band to change my mind, but sadly, it's not quite there yet. The biggest problem I had with Extinctions is, for me, it just feels that there is a sense of a loss of identity. Much of the album's makeup is fairly nondescript metalcore, deathcore, and lacks that overall classic Unearth sound for me personally. There are particular influences that really do shine through. For example, on Survivalist, for me it sounds very, very similar to what you would imagine Thy Art Is Murder might sound like. But for me, I felt like there was somewhat of a loss of identity. Don't get me wrong, there are definitely elements of Unearth that we've come to know and love throughout the years which are on the record. For example, the assault of the final track, One With The Sun. Or that signature Unearth chorus on Incinerate. Which all has the hallmarks of Unearth, but was not quite enough to save it for me. And it's primarily due to the ideas that the band are trying to implement. You know, they'll start something really, really interesting, but then it will just fall slightly short at the end. There are elements which have a great idea behind them, but it's the execution that lets them down, for me personally. There are also these very odd bends which kind of come up throughout the album, evidenced primarily in The Hunt Begins and the Hardline Downfall. And for me, that brings it even more into this territory of nondescript metalcore bands. You know, it doesn't sound like something the band would have created themselves, but instead sounds like they're trying to be too similar to their contemporaries, when really, Unearth are famous for being Unearth because they're so brilliant at what they do. That combination of fierce rhythm and that amazing melody is what made us fall in love with them. But most importantly, it doesn't really sound like an evolution. But again, as I was talking about those bends, the worst offender in that respect is Sidewinder, where they're almost like chromatically increasing up the fretboard. However, for me, I think one of the biggest gripes were the vocals. You know, I've listened to Trevor Phipps's vocals for ages, and what I've always loved about Unearth is this sense of, it's slightly high-pitched but almost in that sort of hardcore territory. And here there are sections where the singer tries to kind of go into this deeper sound, which overall for me just doesn't quite suit the sound of the band. There are some great sections, however, for example on One With The Sun. But later on, the track also has these deeper vocals. However, there are, of course, classic sides to Unearth on this album. For example, Cultivation of Infection has those awesome pick scrapes that we can hear, and there's a definite hardcore vibe on the record, I think, which is worth noting, particularly on the track Incinerate, which has that sort of two-step groove. Final prayer for the living, doing all but see nothing but strangers. Final prayer for the living, and as much as it may not be to my taste, the playing you cannot deny is incredibly tight. And there's a fantastic grooving riff on King of the Arctic, which does showcase there's a small amount of evolution, but like I said, it's not quite enough to warrant you know, an idea that, wow, this band have really kind of pushed the boat out here. But there are some really fantastic sections of guitar work, for example, on Incinerate, which has that classic neoclassical lick. Which I've always loved about Unearth, and particularly on The March was where I fell in love with them. And on Darkness in the Light, there's so much of that, and I just wish there was a little bit more of this melody rather than just kind of focusing on these big, meaty, fairly plain riffs. As you guys know, I'm not one to be negative, but for me this one just didn't quite hit the mark and have me come back to the record as the previous albums did. However, if you're a fan of metalcore and particularly Unearth, I do urge you to give it a go, because as much as there are some negatives, there's also some positives there as well. And I don't want this to be a damning review on the album, because there are some great bits on the album. And for that reason, I'm going to give the record a 3 out of 5. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like and subscribe button. Make sure to check out all my other album reviews, interviews, all sorts of stuff. I've got a weekly Apocalyptic Anniversary series over on Metal Sucks, which you can check out as well. Make sure to drop a comment, let me know what you think of the album. I'll see you guys next week for another review. Alright, take care.